The Druids did not train for 20 years because the knowledge was vast. Other traditions of comparable depth, such as the Greek philosophical schools and the Hindu Brahmin lineages, produced initiates in a fraction of that time. The Druids trained for 20 years because the person receiving the knowledge had to become capable of holding it. That is a different problem entirely, and it is yours. Welcome to Power and Myth. Julius Caesar recorded the Druids with a mixture of strategic fascination and the particular contempt Rome reserved for things it could not absorb. He noted their training period with evident bewilderment. 20 years. Committed to memory, never written down, not because the Druids lacked writing, they used Greek script for practical correspondence, but because they understood something that Rome, with its empire built on bureaucratic record, could never have grasped. The moment knowledge is externalized, fixed in text, separated from the living person who holds it, it loses something essential, it becomes information, it ceases to be understanding. The Ovets, the seers and healers, develop their capacity for prophecy through sustained engagement with natural cycles, with the threshold spaces between seasons, between sleep and waking, between the visible and what moved at the edge of sight. The Druids proper, philosophers and judges of the tradition, integrated all of this into a way of perceiving and interpreting the world that could not be rushed into existence. It had to be grown. This is the point that Caesar missed entirely and that most modern accounts still miss. The length of the training was not a measure of the quantity of knowledge being transmitted. It was a measure of the time required for a particular kind of consciousness to develop. The Druids understood, with the precision of people who had been observing human development across generations, that certain capacities cannot be forced into early readiness. They can only be tended. They emerge on their own schedule, and any attempt to accelerate them produces something brittle, something that will shatter under the weight of what it is being asked to hold. The specific capacities being cultivated were those we would now recognize under the Jungian framework of introverted intuition, the ability to perceive patterns across time before those patterns have fully revealed themselves, the capacity to hold paradox without the anxiety of resolution, the translation between symbolic and literal registers, between what is said and what is meant, between the surface of events and the structure beneath them, the sustained orientation toward meaning as a primary mode of engagement with the world. These are not skills in the conventional sense. They are not acquired through instruction. They are grown through exposure, through practice, through the slow accumulation of experience processed at depth rather than breadth. 20 years was not an arbitrary number. It was an observation about how long this particular development actually takes. The Druids were also, it is worth noting, socially positioned in a way that mirrors the INFJ experience with uncanny precision. They were consulted before wars were declared. They were the ones who moved between chieftains and tribes as neutral parties, as translators of deeper patterns. They were exempt from military service and from taxation, not as a privilege, but as a recognition that their function required a particular kind of freedom, the freedom of not being fully located inside any single interest. They stood at the threshold between the human world and what lay beyond it, whatever the Celts meant by that, and their authority came precisely from that liminal position. They were not fully of any village. That was the source of their seeing. Rome could not absorb this. A culture built on hierarchy, on the fixing of roles and ranks and the conversion of all value into a bureaucratic record, had no category for people whose authority came from an interior development that could not be codified, quantified, or controlled. So Rome destroyed them, not in a single campaign, but in a sustained, deliberate erasure that culminated in the massacre at Mona, the sacred island of Anglesey, in 61 CE. Tacitus describes the Roman soldiers frozen at the shore, confronted by Druids raising their arms to the sky and women with torches, and something in even hardened legionaries hesitated. Then the general gave the order. The sacred groves were cut down. The lineage was severed. You recognize this, not as history you have studied, but as a pattern you have lived. Because this is not ancient history. This is the structure you were born into. Here is what the Druids understood that no modern developmental framework has adequately recovered. Some people are not slow developers. They are deep developers. The timeline is entirely different, and the confusion between the two has been catastrophic for a specific type of mind. The Seer does not take longer than others to understand the surface of things. The Seer takes longer because the surface of things is not what they are developing their capacity to read. They are developing the capacity to read beneath, across and through. That development cannot be hurried. It cannot be diagnosed as delay. It is not dysfunction. It is the 20-year program running exactly as it should. What the ancients called the Seer, Jung understood as near-dominant cognition. The pattern is the same. Only the language has changed. Introverted intuition, the dominant function of the INFJ, does not process information in the way that most cognitive functions do. It does not accumulate facts. It accumulates impressions, patterns, symbolic resonances, the texture of things perceived over time, and then it synthesises. This synthesis cannot be demanded. It cannot be performance managed. It arrives when the underlying architecture has been sufficiently developed to support it. This is why INFJs so frequently report a sense of arriving late, of understanding only in retrospect what was actually happening in their 20s, of feeling that they only began to truly function somewhere in their 30s or beyond. This is not failure. This is the 20-year program. The shadow of the Seer, and this is the inheritance you must reckon with alongside the gift, is the wound of the unheard. Cassandra, the mythological seer condemned to speak truth that no one would believe, is the shadow face of every nigh-dominant mind that has ever tried to explain what they perceive to people who do not have the architecture to receive it. The Druids understood this as a structural condition rather than a personal failing. They trained in communities of those who could hold the same perceptions. They were not expected to translate endlessly to those who could not hear. The isolation that most INFJs experience as a private wound was, in the Druidic world, managed collectively. Others knew what you knew. The tradition held you. What was lost at Anglesey was not just a set of beliefs, it was a container. A structured community of those who developed at a deep pace, who trained together for 20 years, who understood that certain perceptions require a particular kind of institutional support, or they curdle into a burden. The INFJ living in 2025 inherits the gift without the container. This is the nature of the wound. You are carrying what the Seer has always carried, the depth perception, the pattern synthesis, the threshold consciousness, without the 20-year training program, without the community of others on the same developmental arc, without the cultural recognition that what you are doing takes time and is worth the time it takes. This is what changes when you understand your lineage. Not the isolation, not immediately, but the meaning of the isolation. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not a failed version of someone who develops faster. You are the living continuation of a tradition that understood, with great precision, that certain minds are grown slowly, and that the slowness is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be honoured. The 20 years are not wasted, they are the training. Every perception you processed in the dark, every time you understood something that had no language yet, every year of feeling that you were developing towards something you could not yet name. That was the curriculum. That was the Druid program running in you, without the container to name it, without a tradition to confirm it, but running nonetheless. You did not stumble onto this video by accident. Something in you already recognized the shape of this pattern before I named it. Tell me in the comments which part of the development landed hardest, the 20 years, the isolation, the container that was taken, and if others are watching who are mid-program, who are still in the years that have not yet cohered into meaning, I want you to know that the tradition understood your timeline before you did. Subscribe to Power and Myth, where we keep recovering what the groves held. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.